armed and ready to march within 2 weeks.
But my lord, there are too many. They cannot all be armed in time. We don't have the means.
Build a dam, block the stream, work the furnaces night and day.
We don't have enough fuel to feed the fires.
The forest of Fangorn lies on our doorstep. Burn it.
Yes.
We will fight for you.
Swear it.
We will die for Saruman.
The horsemen took your band. They drove your people into the hills to scratch a living off rocks. Take back the lands they stole from you. Burn every village!
We have only to remove those who oppose us. It will begin in the Rohan. Too long have these peasants stood against you, but no more.
All right. So, what we see is a very small clip of a very misunderstood or perhaps little understood people and area or region of Middle-earth that in the novels plays out a much bigger role than in the long term than in the movie itself. And we're talking Dunland, of course, and the Dunlendings, or the peoples of Dunland. Now, a brief overcap, at one time before Gondor became a power, before the Numerians returned to Middle-earth, the second level humans, I guess, the ones who had not become high men as the Elves seen them, they're just the ones who stayed behind and never went west, etc., are quite populous all around Middle-earth. And in this particular area, they called the Dunlandings, and they're related to the people of the White Mountains, who later become wraiths because they break an oath to fight for Isildur. But these people are their cousins, and the Dean Coitus and Dean Ironis or Inos, terms I can't pronounce, but they're in here, and they are what we consider lesser men, and they're a little more brutish, less educated. They're more tribal, not unlike the clans of the early versions of the Highland and Lowland clans of Scotland and Wales and things, and Ireland and so on and so forth. They intermix later with the Dunedain and then the Gondorians. When Rohan comes south, portions of the Rohirrim of Rohan itself used to belong to these people, and the Gondor took it over or claimed it, and then gave it away, and didn't ask these people's ancestors what they thought of it or not, and they were pushed out past the west of the Isengard corridor. So now they're in an area that's little claimed or utilized by modern Gondorians, although in the height of Arnor, when Carthagine and later Carthagine, or however it's pronounced, existed, these were border areas with southern Arnor and open territory that was not claimed, generally speaking, by Arnor or Gondor, but overseen a little bit because they were inhabited by the Dunlendings, right? So the Dunlendings have a huge reason, a lot of anger and animosity against Gondor in general. So it wasn't too hard for Saruman to usurp them or to draw them into its cause. And as we see in the clip, the part of doing so, Saruman agrees to arm them, which, I guess it makes great for cinematic, but these people are generally warrior-like anyway. They would have plenty of weapons in my eyes, but getting new weapons is part of the deal, fine. But it also helps set the stage for later, for when Treebeard comes down out of his mountainous areas and discovers that Saruman's orcs have laid waste to a big chunk of southern Fangorn forest, and makes it personal and justifies Treebeard and the Ents to get involved with bringing Isidore down. So we now kind of understand a little bit, if you didn't know, why that happened, how it happened, and turning the Dunlandings against the Rohirrim allowed Saruman to acquire yet another army to push back his foes. In this case, it's the raids from the Dunlandings in force, that force the Rohirrim to regroup and head for cover at Helm's Deep, so to speak. But in the books, what they don't do so well in the movies, in the books, it's much more clear that it's touched on in the movies. Theoden's son is killed at the fords of the fighting against the Dunlandings. Dunlanders. So Saruman turned the Dunlandings loose several weeks before the War of the Ring gets started in earnest, so to speak, in this section of the deal. So we have here is the Iron Crown Enterprises for MERP, or Middle-earth role-playing game, Dunland and the Southern Misty Mountains. Now this is one of the supplements I really like, and for its settings. And then there's some other things, because obviously your writers and your game designers want to add what some of us consider fluff to the material to give you additional. They needed more stuff. There just wasn't enough from the Dunlanding perspective to justify an entire source book, so they added a few extra special things. See, running my mouth is dry work. So we have our introduction. Dunland and the Southern Misty Mountains focuses on a dramatic and strategic region. The regions of the north of the Gateway, between the wide, cool lands of Eredor and the grassy reaches of the Rohan. Extreme diverse in history, inhabitants, and opportunities is an ideal setting for adventures and exploring. Dunland is the home of the fierce and proud Dunlendings, the Dean Lintus. Highland tribes frequently influenced by minions of Sauron and Saruman. Their Dean ancestors experienced similar domination during the Second Age, and most migrated out of the traditional Dunnish homelands into the Elves of the White Mountains. These Dunmen settled all over eastern Eredor, mingling with their older Andoran groups, but they retained their unique culture in the western foothills of the Southern Misty Mountains. Distinct Dunlandings of this region formed an often loose collection of tribal territories which became known as Dunland. Dunland encompasses the rugged foothills that rise north of the Old South Road, joining Tharbad to Cardolan to the markets further east. The highway skirts Dunland's southern border and runs eastward through the White Isen Gap, separating the Misty Mountains to the north from the White Mountains to the south, later called the Gap of Rohan. This portal from Eredor to Gondor served as the most important pass in western Middle-earth. It was once dividing line between the lands dominated by the two Dunedain kingdoms in exile, Arnor and Gondor, and it remains a vital link for the free peoples of the West. Thus, Dunland's importance remains significant despite this reduction of the traffic along the way. It says, a turbulent people, Dunlandings are for the most part herders and hunters who jealously guard their independence and often raid the lands of their kinsmen. Strife is the rule in Dunland, which is just as well for the neighboring folk of the unification. Neighboring folk fear the unification of the warlike Dunmen. This is particularly true of the men of the Cardolan or Rohan, the Dunlandings' oldest, most challenging enemies. Exactly. So, we got a brief timeline from the Second Age, Third Age, the Dunlandings and their history, the Dean Cointus, or people of skill in the foothills and valleys of White Mountains during this Middle Second Age, ancient noble race that crossed westward over the the Unadin, the Udan, at the end of the first age, and they settled in what later would become Gondor. So you can see when the Dunlandings, or when the Dunlendings showed up to start colonizing and taking over the areas that would become Gondor, these folks were already there and were pushed out or absorbed. And we got their society and everyday life, dwellings, commerce and crafts, religion, military structure, physical appearance, oral traditions. And we got an overview of the Southern Misty Mountains, climate, flora, fauna, Dunland, climate and flora. Theoretically speaking, from the movie's perspective, the only time we skirt the edges of Dunland. Romeria mentions passing over the ruined bridge at Tharbad, so he had to pass through the Isen Gap and skirted these folks' territory or the northern edges of it. We know that in the second movie, when we're dealing with Rohan and the raiders that you see coming over the hills, as shown in the clip, are Dunlendings, the ones who the land that they inhabited would be to the east and northeast of Helm's Deep. So the people of Helm's Deep have had trade with these people, have had relations with these people, both good and bad, have had suffered raids from them, so on and so forth, have had mixed feelings and opinions for them, although they do not invade or try to lay siege to Helm's Deep, because they're not stupid. That's not how they operate. They basically are running rampant all over Rohan while tying up Rohirrim forces. This is one reason why there's mention in the Gathering of Rohan where certain parts of the Rohirrim's muster are not able to come to the king's call, and that's because they're dealing with hordes of Dunlandings running all over the place, and hordes of orcs and goblins running all over the place. Even after the destruction of Saruman's forces, bulk of his orcish forces at the Battle of Helm's Deep and the sacking of Isengard itself, there's still a lot of these rogue outfits running around, and the Rohirrim will still be dealing with these people for some time after the War of the Ring is over. As Aragorn will send some diplomats and some forces to the northeast or to the northwest to deal with these tribes and to either get them to lay down their arms and go back home to their farms and their herds, or bring them to battle, defeat them. And it takes a couple years to get that mess straightened out. So you can see just how much is actually going on in the background from what you see in the movie and even in the book, which is the way we like to see things. Wheels inside of wheels, that there's always consequences. Just like the consequences of trying to arm all these Dunlandings to get them to fight. Saruman issues orders to start harvesting Fangorn Forest, which later turns around and bites him. Gets him really in Dutch with Treebird and the Ents. So Dunland, the climate, the flora, the fauna, various plants and animals and things that you can encounter. Here's a doozy. The Jeet Woon, these marsh birds, also known as cleaver beaks or sword beaks, are stand some 9 feet tall, long swan-like necks and powerful legs. From a distance, they may look like a large crane, although they are not of that family. Yeah, birds of prey in every sense. Their legs and talons, and they can grip even small creatures tightly, and their beaks are made for tearing. These birds live on snakes, fish, and small mammals. Their reputation for hostility comes from their protection of their nests, which are usually hidden in swampy areas. They will also attack when they are surprised by noisy people. These birds are incredibly strong. With their superior height, can do terrible damage to the normal human, often splitting the skull. Yeah, just, a few things. And then we got politics and power of the Southern Misty Mountains. So the Southern Misty Mountains are usually thought to be relatively inactive. However, it has enough activity of a unique nature to influence the people of the lands below. Presence of giants, elves, dragons, great eagles, and their individually powerful creatures have always had an effect on the Dunland. In general, the powerful creatures of the Southern Misty Mountains are located on the western borders because the mountains on the eastern side drop off rather drastically. Any interaction with the inhabitants of the mountains usually come by way of Dunland or the little-traveled southern pass. So we got yet another dragon that's not mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, of course, but why should they be? You're not going to have, you're not going to have Tolkien's not going to try to mention everything going on. And like I've said in other installments, the idea that Smaug is the only active or semi-active dragon in this area, this area of Middle Earth is, it sounds good for the books, but I don't, it's not generally realistic. It's implied that there's 20 or 30 of them living up in the withered hearth, so why not have an occasional younger one get set out for high adventure and to locate a suitable place for a lair of their own that's far enough away from their older, far more venerable and nastier relatives, so they can build up their own little hordes. This is Turkalun the Worm. I cannot pronounce it. The War of the Wrath ended. Many of Morgoth's servants escaped to roam free the world. Of these creatures, the most feared, besides Sauron himself and the Balrog, were the dragons. Dragons that escaped the wrath of Valar journeyed along the Iron Mountains eastward to the withered hearth, where they took up residence and where they ate, slept, and terrorized dwarves, carried out their bizarre mating rituals. From one of those matings came a special dragon, one of the very few born after Morgoth's defeat. Turkalun was his name, and he was stunned, being only half the size he should have been upon hatching, never growing to a respectable size. Dragons were never known for their charity, and new dragons always had to fight for a place among the others on the heath. Of course, Turkalun realized after a couple defeats at the hands and breath of other dragons that his place was not in the Erd Mithrin. So he decided to head south. And just what he did. So, and as for another interesting creature, and his contacts with Amon Lind, his physical parents, and then we have Amon Lind, and I'm probably not pronouncing it right. Let's see. There's a picture of you. It's a blueprint for it. Come on. There you go. Amon Lind. Amon Lind is an interesting addition. This is one of both the dragon and Amon Lind are obviously things that the writers added to add flavor and flair and to spice up the source book and the potential adventures, and that are not included in Tolkien's works. That by all means doesn't mean that they weren't plausibly capable of being there. And it says here, in Aragorn, during the Second Age, Noldor reached the height of their technology in the city of Ost-Endil, and I have a module for that. Led by Celebrimbor, the smiths of the Gwyn Ithmeridian were responsible for this technology. They created wonderful works of all types, some with the aid of Anantar, or the Lord of Gis, who was actually Sauron in disguise. At the height of their power, they created the Rings of Power, which also proved to be their undoing. Before the downfall of Ost-Endil, and after the departure of Anantar, a small group of younger elves decided to leave. The reasons are all concerned with the personal freedoms which were being hindered by the society. Several had projects they wished to work on without fear of interference from their masters. They left quietly and quickly, taking only close friends and servants, and not telling anyone of their departure. For a while they lived in a rather primitive structure in the low foothills, while they designed a keep to build in the mountains. They made friends with some of the dwarves of Moria, started building a small citadel high up on the western side of the Misty Mountains in the northern area of Dunland. They also recruited some giants to help in the building process, which took some 50 years. Femur, the architect, designed the keep of Amon Lind, i.e. the Hill of Song, so that the natural updraft sweeping up the cliff would pass through giant collecting ducts onto the fortress. Subsequently, the wind passes through smaller and smaller ducts and tubes that divided from a larger and eventually project from points all over the Citadel. These pipes and tubes are responsible for the name of the Citadel, the assorted musical notes issuing from the castle depending on the strength of the winds coming into the collecting pipes. This design was to allow the wind to be channeled through a specific area so the songs can be played. For the next 3,400 years, the elves at Dunland worked their own projects and experiments. Even now, they're sometimes so involved in their work they don't see each other see one another for days. They govern themselves and their retainers as a group. Because of their adherence to a person's right to individual behavior, there is rarely any disciplinary action taken. They rarely interact with other persons in the area, although there are some agreements made by individuals for the good of all. Occasionally, they are attacked by trolls or small party orcs, but never in force. They are also friendly with the giants in the area, and a few of the Dunlendings around Tharbad knew of the presence of the Citadel, but not who lives there. Every once in a great while, someone who sees the Citadel from a distance will be curious enough to want to find out its inhabitants are. Most likely, they will not be politely turned away by the guard, but depending on the mood, more likely than not, they will be politely turned away. Depending on the mood of the elves, they might also be invited for dinner and some entertainment. Sometimes they might actually end up being the entertainment. There are a total of 36 free people living at Dunland, the 7 founders, the guard captain, 15 men at arms, 3 of the weapons, described later in this section, and 10 other retainers, i.e. staff. Somebody's got to clean and cook and, take care of the place. And all of the retainers are very loyal to the founders of Dunland, most having grown up with them in Ocean, Italy, or having served the families before they were born. The noble members of the community are detailed individually below. It says here, it must be remembered that the elves of Dunland are a very powerful, albeit small force, and do not often interfere in the affairs of men. They have lived 3,400 years of peace and would not mind an additional 3,400 more. If the whole keep were ever threatened by a force they could not overcome, they would retreat to Rivendell or Linden, and there they may stay, or they may sail to the Undying Lands. So then we got the various key founders. They're all pretty interesting people. And they're also strange for elves. They have some habits that set them apart. I think some of it can be considered a little dodgy or dark habits, maybe. All right. So, Sulcanano. The promising student was looked upon as one of the finest upcoming smiths when Annatar arrived. Although he disliked Annatar, he often listened to him, took his advice because of the knowledge that went behind it. His hobby was creating things that fly, and doing so using this kind of enchanted metal. It's pretty nasty stuff. Said Mithranian, the metal Mithranian. It has an anti-gravity effect. This also uses it's uranium. That's what it is. It's uranium. And then he uses a process, and he had no real success with it. It says here he had no real success with Mithranian until he met to the Carlisle line some 300 years ago. With his help, Sir made enough of the metal to plate the bottom of a 20-foot boat. With some left over, he now has in the process of duplicating the procedure for a larger vessel. At Amelin, he's considered a recluse by the other residents, so they know him to be a genius. They wonder about his obsession with flight. He not only makes flying things, but also keeps hunting falcons, partially to study and partially because he enjoys hunting them. Physically, Silcano is tall. He's 6'9", but very thin for his size, and not a very dark hair. His eyes are blue and violet. Then we got Helkama. also worked in the, since she worked in the glass-smithies and then the high jewel after an order entered Middle-earth as a journey to exile. He was very good at his work, particularly likes working with Leon, which is a obsidian glass that's the only way to heat, the only way to shape it is to heat it with, or reduce it by an extreme cold. It makes it malleable the colder it gets. So the hotter it gets, the more solid and sharper it gets. So it's a pretty nasty thing to have if you need to go up against a dragon, I guess. So kind of short for a Noel. He's 6'2". It makes up with his lack of height and muscular, very broad shoulder and stocky built. Beamer says he's really a tall, beardless dwarf, much to Helma's dislike. His brown hair and dark green eyes, and very pale, skin being almost translucent. Then there's Famiri. Famiri is a Sindran elf and designer of the castle. He left Lilith, his wife, and because there were no buildings left to build in Isen, designed most of the keep before they left. Many changes were made on site. He picked the site for western view, blah, blah. Alath, who's trying to teach some giants to read. Warner, Aranel, Telsisair, and the weapons. Basically, one of the things that made these folks leave this one particular elf Aranel's mother was a noble, his father was a cinder. As that brings his signing cinder and shows his way he dresses and arranges his rooms. His mindset, however, is noble, because he's always been curious about creating and changing things. Because of his nature, he became an amnest and excelled at all he did. While talking to a smith about reworking a weapon, he realized soldiers were much like weapons. Perhaps they could be improved by reworking. He soon began experimenting with animals, change their physical structures so that they function differently. He hoped to improve the average soldier by improving his physical body or instincts. Word of his experiments soon spread, and he was strongly urged by others to stop his inhumane activities. They had known that he had wanted to someday continue his experiments with humans and elves. They would have done much more. This greatly disturbed him, and he began thinking of leaving. Soon after this, he met with the others who were planning to leave and decided to go with them. During this time, he was benefited by a strange experiment that went wrong in the smith halls. While the process of making an item of power, a terrible accident occurred. Two smiths died horribly, with the very flesh of their bodies merged together. Andrew found out from his friends the hall that a large gem of irregular shape was created by the accident. Gem has a very strange ability to merge any two items together, though it's not always perfect, as the smiths found out. When Elril would take the gem with him, Griefstick and Smiths did not notice it was gone for quite some time. So as you can get, this particular elf likes to experiment with creating blendings of animals and humans, or elves, or dwarves, or anything else he gets hands on. This is after moving to Dunland. Arrow continues experiments. At first worked only with animals, using result in failure. However, combining, he learned about emerging animal stone and spells. He was able to make some combinations of animals that lived. His sister Telsisair helped him out in order to reduce the pain of his subjects. Over the years, he refined his techniques and started working with men. He made a deal with Tarpamon and the dragon to buy subjects. First, their experiments on humans were vague and not very noticeable. Later, he was able to make more radical changes. By the year 1640, several successes, including the use of the procedure of his first elven subject. Helkama and Lilith did not like the direction his experiments were taking, objected with little effect since the subjects had volunteered. Telsisair also objects, but she is rather subdued and will not act against her brother. Elril is also quick to point out the reason he came to Dunland was to get away from closed-mindedness. The others that have a say in the keep do not really care one way or another, so long as he doesn't start killing the guards. Elril is very proud of his plot and feels someday it will be very useful. Yeah. And we got some of the weapons. Merged humans and several types of animals. The mental stress of these changes often causes the subject to go mad. Only 4 of the subjects have adjusted to their state. One of these was a Dunlending that narrow merged with a large fruit bat. The man died of old age after serving the Citadel as a guard for years. He was extremely intelligent. The procedure had given him extraordinary senses of smell and hearing, although his vision had been diminished. His reflexes had also been increased, so his reaction time was that above most elves. There were 3 other such creatures. 2 were merged with cats, 1 with a badger. To alleviate the confusion, what they should be called, Elena just calls them weapons. The first of the weapons is a Northman's mercenary and got lost in the mountains and captured by Turkland, the dragon, 10 years ago. He was altered by adding many of the attributes of the great snow leopard. Though he had initial problems, he now enjoys the added strength and agility of his new form. The next weapon was an elvish prisoner of Turkatolan that volunteered to go through the process to obtain his freedom from the dragon. Since this was Eleanor's first procedure using elf, he was quite apprehensive, but everything went well, and the elf was not too horrified by the results, although the appearance of hair upon his face was quite startling. The third weapon was a Sylvan girl, Muriel, who was a servant in the Citadel. Upon seeing the Northman and the elf in their final forms, she volunteered for the same treatment to become unusual. She was also in love with Elnell and wants to get his attention. He performed a procedure on her using the attributes of a lynx before anyone else knew and was successful. In fact, he was almost sure the procedure would work on elves consistently better than men due to their superior healing abilities and resistance to disease. He decided that in the future he will try and find elvish specimens in preference to men. All the weapons are capable of normal feats of agility and strength. They also have several secondary features of animals, such as finely distinct marked fur covering most of their bodies, as well as slightly longer than normal teeth. They have claws on their hands and feet and can be used to great effectiveness in combat. And Enril and some of the others have also noted the presence of animal-like behavior in both the subjects, manifesting itself in the form of extreme unpredictability, a quicker temper, quick mood shifts. All these mental changes make the weapons more difficult to get along with, but they have not been warranted. They're being further altered or caged. Just so you got an idea what these guys are doing. And the giants, eagles, Southern Misty Mountains in general. It says Third Age, 2050. How can I renew communication with Riverdale? Errolard had known their presence for years but left them in peace. This time, Silcano had completed the permanent propulsion devices for a smaller airboat, seeding and duplicating procedures for making the Murthan for the help of Turklon. Silcano decided, however, not to use them for fear of discovery by power growing adult Golder. During this time, Turkon was content to tinker with magic on Solomon, not become bothering to deal with the people he caught. He just ate them. The White Council was formed in 2463. The Elves sent to the Elves on Land, etc., etc. Power and politics at Dunland for 1640. The clans, and which ones are in power, what they do, and how they're related. And we have a clan chart. How we can tell, it says hatred, cold, cool, indifference, warm, friendly, and allied. So you can see not everybody gets along. And for the most part, the Dunlandings are busy bickering and fighting among themselves to mass together in sufficient numbers to become a threat to their larger neighbors, at least until Saruman steps in and starts mediating or negotiating or basically filling them full of BS about the Rohan so that they'll get together. So he talks about the Dean Oidus, the Dean Contis, the Dunedin. There's a handful of them still living in Dunland proper as of 1640. Leftovers from Cardolin and Tharbad. We also have the Temple of Justice, which is a religious organization tied to the Dark Lord. Then there's a small there's still a small village of hobbits living in the region called A little information on them, the traders, smugglers, other people that wander in and out. Then we got a couple little modules. One dealing with the giants in their home. Dunland, of course, with the elves, and then trying to avoid becoming a weapon, I guess. All right. A lot of interesting stuff there. Hang on a second here. I'm going to take a pause. Alright, resume recording. The lair of the dragon. And this dragon, his lair is just so heavily trapped, it's crazy. Isildur's tomb. So late in the Third Age, Sauron's servants found in their search for the One Ring in the Gladdenfields, they believed it was the body of Isildur. They took it and all that they could find around it back to Sauron, but he did not find the One Ring on the body. Sauron gave the body to the servants to dispose of. On that day, Nothar, the great eagle, happening flying above earth, and saw the body about to be thrown on fire. Seeing the armored trappings of a great old Dunedain lord, he swooped down and bore the body skyward. Looking over, finding no identifying marks, he carried the body to a point on the southern slope of Mithelross, one of the big mountains, dug a shallow grave and buried his body in it. No one except for his eldest son, who also died that same night, knew that Isildur was carrying the seed of the white tree with him to plant in Numus. When the body was searched, the seed was not removed because it was of no use to Sauron, and he wished it burned with the rest of the body. The seed remained dormant for state for about 3,000 years when it sprouted and began to grow. This drew the attention of Northander, who reported to Gwenthor, who then in turn finally gave this information to Gandalf. Sites of entrance: Art Dunham, the largest Dunlending city or town that serves as a marketplace for outsiders. Carden Wood, the store village in New Marsh. Smuggler's Hold, village at Killen and the Healer's Hall. Felamir's estate, the wealthy Dunedain landowner from western Dunland who lives with his family and retainers large manor house located on his estate 60 miles southwest of Tharbad. Temple of Justice. Venture A's Southern Misty Mountain Adventures, a call from Singing Hill, trading with the giants, assault on a lazy dragon, finding a southern pass. A troll hunt, a Dunland Adventures, a troll hunt, mission for the king, a clan war, sacrifice for justice. There you go, master encounter NPCs. Master NPC channel. I was listening to a little typo, I think, going on there. Master NPC, major player character. Should be non-player character. NPC. Okay, see? NPC. Alright, yeah. That, my friends, is Dunland, the Misty Mountains, Middle-earth, Southern Misty Mountains.